My name's Lena Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I own a small auto repair garage on the edge of town. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I get grease under my nails every day, and by the time the sun sets, I'm usually too tired to do much else. But I sleep well because everything I have, I built with my own hands. I wish I could say the same for my family. Growing up, I was always the capable one. My parents said it like a compliment, but it was really an excuse. They didn't need to worry about me because they had Aaron, my little brother, the golden boy. If Aaron wanted something, it appeared. A new guitar, a shiny bike, even extra pocket money for college expenses that somehow ended up funding his nights out. Meanwhile, I worked part-time at a diner and fixed cars behind the building just to pay for trade school. I used to tell myself, it's fine. They love him more because he's younger. That's normal. But it stopped feeling normal the day I realized they respected him less than they pitied me. 5 years ago, I thought maybe things were finally changing. I just bought my first house, a small 2-bedroom fixer-upper, cracked porch, squeaky door, but when I looked at it, I saw possibility. After 3 months of repainting, rewiring, and reflooring, I decided to host Thanksgiving there. It was my way of showing them I'd made something of myself. That morning, I basted the turkey, checked the oven twice, even folded napkins into little leaf shapes like I saw online. It was silly, but I wanted everything perfect. When Mom and Dad arrived, they smiled politely. Mom brought pie. Dad sniffed the air and said, "Smells good, kiddo." For a while, it felt nice, warm. Then Aaron showed up with Julia. Julia worked in real estate and wore it like a trophy. Even her perfume smelled expensive, like something that didn't belong in my modest little home. Aaron wrapped an arm around her and said, "Lena, wow, you did this all by yourself?" I smiled. Every nail, every inch of paint. Julia looked around, tilting her head. "It's cozy," she said, dragging out the word. "Reminds me of my college dorm, before Aaron and I moved into the condo downtown." I felt the sting immediately, but I just nodded. Glad it brings back memories. Dinner started fine, for maybe 15 minutes. Then Julia began her monologue about their view of the skyline, the imported marble countertops, and how security is so important these days. You never know who your neighbors are. Dad chuckled awkwardly. Mom sipped her wine. I just kept carving the turkey, pretending I didn't hear. Then Aaron looked around and said, "You should really think about upgrading, Lena. This neighborhood's not great. If you ever sell, I can connect you with one of Julia's colleagues." That did it. I set down the knife and looked him straight in the eye. "I like my house, Aaron. I didn't need to marry money to buy it." The table froze. Julia's fork clinked against her plate. Aaron's face turned crimson. He muttered, "You don't have to be jealous just because some of us—" I cut him off. "Jealous? You think I envy you? You've never earned anything in your life. Mom and Dad spoiled you, and now Julia funds the rest. You can't stand that I made something without anyone's help." Mom whispered, "Lena, please." But I was done swallowing silence. Aaron pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "You've always had a chip on your shoulder," he snapped. "No one asked you to be the family martyr." Julia stood, grabbing her purse. "We don't need to stay where we're not appreciated." And just like that, they left. Dad stared at his empty plate. Mom sighed. "He didn't mean it, sweetheart." I laughed bitterly. "Of course he didn't. He never does, and you never stop him." That night, after they left too, I sat alone at my spotless table, the pie untouched, the candles still flickering. It wasn't the first time my brother made me feel small, but it was the first time I didn't let him. From that night on, we didn't speak, not once in 5 years. And honestly, I didn't miss him. Until last week, when my mother called out of the blue. Her voice trembled through the line. "Lena, your brother's getting married. To Julia." I just said, "Good for them." But then she took a breath that told me the call wasn't over. "We've promised to cover part of the wedding, the venue and the decorations, but, sweetheart," she hesitated, "we need your help." I froze. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Then her words echoed again. They wanted me to help pay for Aaron's wedding. The same Aaron who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years. The same Aaron who humiliated me in my own home. The same Aaron who got everything I never did. I gripped the phone tighter, heat rushing up my throat. "Help you? For his wedding?" Mom's voice softened, as if she were explaining something simple. "Family helps family, Lena. You know that. I looked around my quiet little house, the walls I'd painted, the furniture I'd saved up for, and felt something inside me crack open. 5 years of resentment, 5 years of pretending not to care, flooding back all at once. My voice came out calm, but it carried every ounce of anger I'd swallowed since childhood. Family helps family? Then where were you when I needed help with school? When I was working double shifts just to keep the lights on? You didn't lift a finger then, but now you want me to hand over money for Erin's big day? Silence, only her breathing on the other end. I waited. Nothing. Finally, I said, "No, I'm not paying for his wedding. You made your choice a long time ago." And I hung up. For a moment, the quiet felt satisfying, then heavy, because I knew this wasn't over. When I went to bed that night, my phone buzzed once more. Dad's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer, but the voicemail he left was short, his voice tired and disappointed. "Lena, your mom told me. We need to talk." The next morning, I walked into the garage early. The air was still cold, carrying the faint smell of motor oil and metal. Usually, it was comforting, predictable, mechanical. Machines don't lie, they don't guilt trip you, they don't twist words like people do. You fix what's broken, and it stays fixed. But that morning, even the hum of the hydraulic lift couldn't drown out Mom's voice from last night. Family helps family. I replayed it over and over, the same line she'd used my whole life, just in different forms. When Erin needed a car, family helps family. When he crashed that same car and they asked me to repair it for free, family helps family. When I couldn't pay my last semester's tuition and they said, "You're strong, you'll figure it out." Funny how that phrase only ever applied in one direction. By the time the clock hit noon, I was still stewing when my phone buzzed again. Dad. I hesitated before picking up, hoping maybe he'd talk sense, but deep down I already knew better. "Hey, Dad," I said flatly, wiping my hands on a rag. "Lena," his tone was careful, too careful. "I heard you talk to your mom last night." "Yeah, I did, and I meant what I said." He sighed. "Look, sweetheart, I know you and your brother have your issues, but this isn't about the past. It's about family sticking together." There it was, again, like a script they'd memorized. "Dad," I said, trying to stay calm, "you two made a promise you can't afford. That's not my problem. I'm not paying for a wedding I'm not even invited to yet." He chuckled awkwardly. "Of course you'll be invited." I almost laughed. "Oh, will I? You sure about that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "We just don't want to embarrass ourselves, Lena. Julia's parents are helping with everything, and your mom doesn't want them to think we're struggling." I could hear him shifting, embarrassed by his own words. "Struggling?" I repeated. "You mean human?" "Come on, Lena, you know how your mother is. She just wants things to look right." "So you'll go broke to look right?" I snapped. "You'll take money from the daughter you ignored for years, just so the golden boy can have a pretty wedding?" "Lena, please," he said, voice tired now. "Don't make this harder." I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "I'm not making it harder, Dad. You are. I've worked for everything I have, and you still treat me like a backup plan." He went silent, for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost defeated. "You've changed, Lena." "No," I said quietly. "I've just stopped pretending." He started to say something, then stopped. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll figure something else out." And he hung up. I stood there for a while, phone still in my hand, listening to the static silence after his call. That night I could not sleep. The whole house felt too quiet, too heavy. I kept pacing, my mind spinning back to every small moment of favoritism that had built up to this. When Erin broke curfew and I got grounded for not keeping an eye on him. When I fixed Dad's old truck engine in the rain, and Mom still scolded me for acting unladylike. When I told them I was opening my own garage, and they said, "That's cute, but don't you want something more stable?" I realized that every time I'd worked harder, it just gave them permission to expect more. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their fallback. By the end of that week, I thought maybe things would cool off. But then, just like always, my family found a way to make it worse. I was tightening a bolt under a customer's car when my phone pinged with a message from my cousin Mark. "Hey, Lena, we need to talk. It's about your folks." I frowned, wiping sweat from my temple, then called him back. "Mark, what's going on?" He hesitated. "Your mom's been talking to everyone in the family. Says you're refusing to help and that she's really upset." I froze. "She what?" "She didn't say anything mean exactly, but you know how people talk. Now Aunt Ruth's saying you've changed. Uncle Neil's saying you've become cold. And Grandma's asking what happened to the sweet little girl who used to bring her flowers every Sunday. I close my eyes, the wrench slipping from my hand and clanging on the floor. Of course, they were turning it into gossip. That's how it always went. Make me the villain so no one questions their choices. Mark, I said, my voice shaking. They left out the part where they asked me for money for Aaron's wedding, right? He sighed. Yeah, they didn't mention that. Of course not, I muttered bitterly. Look, he said softly, I'm not taking sides. I just thought you should know before it spreads more. You know how this family is. Yeah, I whispered. I know exactly how this family is. After we hung up, I just stood there in the garage, surrounded by the smell of oil and steel, feeling the heat crawl up my neck. All my life, I'd been taught that silence was the mature choice, that peace was worth more than pride. But now, silence felt like permission. Permission for them to twist the story until I was the ungrateful daughter again. So that night, I did something reckless. I opened the family group chat, the one I'd muted for years, and I typed, just to clarify, Mom and Dad asked me to help pay for Aaron's wedding. I said no. Haven't spoken to him in 5 years, and I'm not paying for something I'm not part of. I'm not starting drama. I'm setting the record straight. Then I hit send. The little scene notifications popped up one by one. No one replied for 5 minutes. Then the phone began to buzz. Aunt Ruth. Lena, that was unnecessary. You're making your parents look bad. Grandma. Sweetheart, family isn't about keeping score. My uncle. You've changed since you bought that house. Money's made you cold. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I expected. And then, as if scripted, the screen lit up with Mom, calling. I almost ignored it, but then I thought, fine, let's end this once and for all. I answered. Before I could speak, she launched in. Lena, why would you send that message to everyone? You've humiliated us. Humiliated you? I repeated, stunned. You've been telling people I'm selfish, and I just told the truth. It's not the truth the way you said it, she snapped. Now everyone thinks we're begging for money. I took a deep breath, my patience finally breaking. You were begging for money, Mom. Her silence was sharp, heavy. Then she said the one line she always used when she couldn't win an argument. You're turning your back on your family, Lena, and one day you're going to regret it. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the cold garage wall. No, Mom, I said quietly. For the first time in my life, I think I won't. I hung up before she could answer. My phone buzzed again, but I let it ring. For once, the sound didn't make me flinch. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was power, the power of not apologizing for saying no. Still, I had no idea the next call I'd get wouldn't be from my parents. It would be from someone I never expected to hear from again, my brother Aaron. The screen lit up with his name and a short message. Can we talk? I stared at that message for a long time. Can we talk? Just 3 words, but they hit harder than anything my parents had said. 5 years of silence. No birthdays, no holidays, not even a lazy, hope you're doing well. And now suddenly, he wanted to talk? I didn't reply right away. I just set the phone down on my workbench and watched it vibrate against the metal. My chest felt tight, not angry tight, but that strange mix of nerves and curiosity you get before something big happens. What did he want? An apology? A truce? Or just to convince me to help pay for his picture-perfect wedding? By the time my shift ended, I'd gone over a dozen scenarios in my head. Still, when I got home that evening, I typed a single word back. Sure. His reply came within minutes. Can we meet in person? Not over text. My stomach dropped. He wanted to see me. I almost said no. Almost told him whatever he had to say, he could say through a screen. But some quiet, stubborn part of me whispered, you'll never move on until you hear him out. So I gave in. When and where? He suggested a small cafe downtown, the same one Mom used to take us to after church when we were kids. It was a strange choice. Too sentimental, too deliberate, but I agreed. The next afternoon, the sky was pale and gray, threatening rain. I pulled into the parking lot 10 minutes early, sat in my truck, and just watched through the windshield. Aaron was already there, sitting by the window, nursing a cup of coffee, his fingers drumming on the table like they always did when he was anxious. He looked older, not just in age, but in the way guilt hangs on someone's face. I walked in, trying to hold myself steady. The bell above the door chimed softly. He looked up immediately. Hey, he said. Hey, I replied, taking the seat across from him. For a long moment, we just sat there, 2 strangers bound by blood and history, but nothing else. Finally, he sighed. I know this is awkward. Thanks for coming. Cut to the chase, Aaron, I said. Why now? He looked down, twisting his cup in his hands. Because Mom's a mess, and because I don't want this wedding to be another war. I blinked, surprised. So this is about the wedding? Yes and no. He looked up, meeting my eyes. I don't want things to be like this anymore. I laughed under my breath. Like what? You mean me calling you out for acting like you're better than everyone? He flinched, but didn't fight back. You were right that night, at Thanksgiving. That stopped me. He'd never said that before, not once. I was an arrogant jerk, he admitted quietly. Julia and I had just moved in together. I was trying to impress her, and I took it out on you. I shouldn't have. His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the kid I grew up with. The one who used to beg me to fix his bike or sneak him extra dessert. I wanted to believe him. I did. But old habits die hard. So what changed? I asked. Why the sudden reflection? He hesitated. Because I found out something you don't know. My eyes narrowed. About what? He took a deep breath. About Mom and Dad. And why they're pushing so hard for the wedding. I frowned. Because they're obsessed with appearances. What else is new? He shook his head. No, it's more than that. The waitress walked by, and we fell silent until she left. Then he leaned forward, voice low. They're in debt, Lena. Deep debt. Mom's been borrowing money behind Dad's back. She used the wedding as an excuse. Said it'd be a temporary loan, so she wouldn't have to tell anyone what it was really for. My stomach twisted. What kind of debt? Medical, he said softly. Mom's been going to the hospital for months. Heart issues. She didn't want anyone to know, especially you. I sat back, the words slamming into me like a wrench dropped on concrete. For a second, I couldn't breathe. That's not possible, I managed. She would have told me. Erin looked at me with that sad half smile I'd seen too many times growing up. The one that said, you still don't get it, do you? She didn't want you to feel guilty. After the fight at Thanksgiving, she thought you hated her. I shook my head, staring down at the table. I never hated her. I just stopped trying to prove myself. We sat in silence, the air between us thick with everything unspoken. After a while, I whispered, Why are you telling me this now? Because I thought you deserved to know, he said, and because I need your help. There it was, the real reason. My heart dropped. So this is still about money? He winced. Not like that. I don't want your money, Lena. I want your help. To talk to her before it's too late. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For years, I'd built walls so high, I forgot there were people on the other side of them. And now, out of nowhere, Erin was asking me to tear one down. Not for him, but for the woman who built them in the first place. I stared out the window, watching the rain finally begin to fall. Part of me wanted to walk away. The other part whispered, You always said you'd never become like them. But maybe forgiveness is how you prove it. I turned back to him. If you're lying about her, Erin, I'm not. His voice was steady. She has a doctor's appointment tomorrow. She doesn't know that I know. I think you should come. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table, an appointment card. My name wasn't on it, but the address was burned into my brain. St. Vincent's Cardiology Center. Please, he said quietly. Just show up. I didn't answer, but I didn't throw the paper away either. When I left the cafe, the rain had turned into a downpour. I stood by my truck for a moment, feeling the water soak through my jacket. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure whether I was angry or afraid. The next morning, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying Erin's words like a bad tune I couldn't shut off. Heart issues, hospital visits. She didn't want you to know. For so long, I'd told myself my mother's silence was punishment, that she'd cut me out because I finally stopped letting her guilt me. But now it felt like I was the one who'd abandoned her. By the time the sun rose, I'd already made my decision. At 10:30 sharp, I parked outside St. Vincent's Cardiology Center. The glass doors gleamed under the late morning light, and the smell of disinfectant hit me the second I walked in. Every step echoed too loud against the tiled floor, like I didn't belong here. At the front desk, the nurse gave me a polite smile. Can I help you? I hesitated. I'm here for... Then I froze, realizing I didn't even know what name the appointment was under. Before I could stumble through an explanation, a familiar voice came from behind me. Lena? I turned around. It was Mom. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with more gray than I remembered. Her skin looked pale, and she wore that same cardigan she'd had for years, the one she used to wear when she felt nervous. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she smiled weakly. What are you doing here? I swallowed hard. Erin told me. Her face changed, a flicker of guilt, then frustration, then something softer. He shouldn't have. Then you should have, I said quietly. She looked down, clutching her purse. I didn't want to worry you. You didn't want to need me, I corrected. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw tears gather in them. Maybe both. Before I could respond, the nurse called her name. Janet Carter? Mom turned back to me. It's just a routine checkup, she said quickly. Nothing serious. I wanted to believe her, but the trembling in her hands told a different story. I'll wait, I said, and she didn't argue. When she disappeared behind the frosted glass doors, I sat down in the waiting area, staring at the bland painting of tulips on the wall. Every tick of the clock felt like a reminder of how much time I'd wasted being angry. Half an hour later, she came out, pale but smiling. Aaron was right behind her, holding her bag. He looked surprised to see me still there. Hey, he said carefully, you stayed. Yeah, I muttered. Guess I did. We all walked outside together. The air was cool, and Mom stopped to catch her breath. I could see the strain in her face, even as she tried to hide it. I wish you'd told me, I said finally. She sighed. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. That's not fair. Isn't it? She said softly. After the Thanksgiving fight, you didn't return my calls. You didn't even send a card that Christmas. My throat tightened. Because every time we talked, it was about Aaron, about how I needed to forgive him, make peace, do the right thing. You never once asked if I was okay. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she had no defense. Aaron shifted uncomfortably beside us. Maybe we should sit somewhere, he murmured. Get coffee? So we did. We ended up at a small cafe a few blocks away. Not the same one from yesterday, but close enough to make my stomach twist. We sat by the window again, the same awkward triangle as always. Me, Aaron, and the mother who still didn't quite know how to talk to me without walking on eggshells. The waiter brought our drinks, and for a while, we just stirred our cups in silence. Then Mom spoke. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, she said. When your father and I promised to help with the wedding, I thought we'd manage. I didn't expect everything else to happen at once. What do you mean, everything else? I asked. She hesitated. The hospital bills, the medications, the mortgage, it piled up faster than we could handle. And your father, he doesn't know how to say no to anyone, especially Aaron. I took a slow sip of coffee. So, instead of asking for help, you pretended everything was fine? Tears welled in her eyes again. I didn't want you to think I was using you. I almost laughed. Bitterly, softly. That's exactly what it felt like when you asked for wedding money. She nodded, accepting it. You're right, and I'm sorry. The apology came out shaky, but real. It was the first honest one I'd heard from her in years. Aaron leaned forward. Mom's been worried sick about how all this would affect us. She wants everyone together again. Together? I repeated. Aaron, you humiliated me in my own house. You haven't spoken to me in 5 years. And now you show up because Mom's sick and suddenly we're a family again? His eyes flashed with guilt. I know what I did. I can't take it back. But maybe this, he gestured between us, is the start of something better. I stared at him for a long moment. Then, against my better judgment, I asked quietly, Are you happy, Aaron, with Julia? He hesitated. Yeah, I mean, she's not easy, but she's driven. She pushes me. Pushes you to be better? I asked. Or pushes you around? He looked down. Maybe both. For the first time, I realized my brother wasn't living some perfect life after all. Behind his arrogance and fancy suits, he looked trapped. Mom reached across the table, her frail hand covering mine. Lena, you've always been so strong, stronger than I ever was. But strength isn't just standing alone. It's knowing when to let people in. Her words hit deeper than I wanted to admit. I pulled my hand back gently. Maybe, I said, but letting people in doesn't mean letting them walk all over you. She smiled faintly. That's true, you learned that from me. I just didn't know it at the time. Something in my chest loosened then. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the start of understanding. When we stood to leave, Aaron pulled something from his jacket pocket and held it out to me, a small white envelope. What's this? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Something Mom wrote a while ago. She wanted you to have it, but she never sent it. I took it, my fingers trembling slightly. The paper was soft at the edges, like it had been opened and closed a dozen times. Mom looked away, embarrassed. You don't have to read it now. I will, I said quietly, just not here. We walked out together, the afternoon sun cutting through the clouds at last. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee and something fragile, something like hope. As I unlocked my truck, I looked at them one last time. Aaron had his arm around Mom, steadying her. For a moment, they looked small, not the giants of my resentment anymore, but people trying, fumbling, failing, the same as me. When I got home, I sat on my couch, still holding that envelope. I traced the folded edges with my thumb before finally opening it. Inside was a single piece of paper, written in Mom's careful, looping handwriting. Lena, if you're reading this, I probably didn't have the courage to tell you myself. You were never the forgotten one, sweetheart. You were the one we leaned on too hard because we thought you could take it. That wasn't love, even though we told ourselves it was. I hope someday you can forgive us, not because we deserve it, but because you deserve peace. At the bottom, there was a small note written in pencil, almost an afterthought. Family only works when both children forgive. I sat there in silence, staring at those words until they blurred. Somewhere deep down, I felt something shift, something old and bitter start to melt. I don't remember falling asleep that night. One moment, I was staring at Mom's letter. The next, I woke up with the paper still in my hand, its edges crumpled from being held too tightly. The words echoed in my head like a heartbeat. You were the one we leaned on too hard because we thought you could take it. For years, I'd replayed every memory of my childhood like a film reel of unfairness. The way Mom beamed at Aaron's smallest achievements, but brushed off mine as expected. The way Dad called me tough instead of good. I used to think it was favoritism. Cruel, deliberate favoritism. But now, I wasn't sure what it was anymore. Later that morning, I drove to my parents' house. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, and for a second, it felt like stepping back into an old life I'd sworn never to revisit. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and the front garden, Mom's pride and joy, had wilted into a patch of brown stems. When I knocked, Dad opened the door. His eyes went wide. Lena? Hey, Dad, I said, trying to sound casual, like it hadn't been over a year since I'd last seen him. He blinked, processing. Then, quietly, come in. The living room smelled like coffee and dust. On the mantel, I noticed a photo from Thanksgiving years ago, the last one we'd all taken together before the fight. Mom had her arm around Aaron. I was standing beside them, smiling. But my eyes, they already looked distant. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother's resting. She had a rough morning. I saw her yesterday, I said, at the hospital. He nodded, sinking into the couch like someone carrying invisible weight. Then you know. I nodded. I know. Silence stretched between us. Not angry this time, just tired. Then he said, we didn't mean to make you feel the way you did, Lena. Your mom and I, we thought we were doing what was best. Aaron was always fragile, needed reassurance. You never seemed to. I leaned against the armchair. So because I was stronger, I didn't need love? He winced. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, Dad, that being the reliable one means I didn't deserve the same care? He looked up, eyes glassy. I'm saying we didn't realize how unfair we were until it was too late. That was the closest thing to an admission I'd ever get from him. The floor creaked softly, and Mom appeared in the hallway, wearing her robe and that same fragile smile she'd had at the hospital. Lena, she said, voice weak but warm. I stood. You should be resting. I've been resting for years, she said quietly. It hasn't helped. Aaron followed her out from the kitchen, his hand hovering near her elbow in case she stumbled. He looked exhausted. Not in a selfish, put-upon way, but in the way people look when they're finally seeing consequences they can't undo. Mom sat on the couch beside Dad and looked at me. I'm glad you came. I hesitated. I got your letter. Her face softened. Then you know how sorry I am. I do, I said, but I also need to understand why. She took a shaky breath. When you were little, you never asked for things. Aaron did, constantly, and we mistook silence for strength. We thought we were helping by giving him everything, and leaving you to figure it out. I swallowed hard. You made me your safety net. Her eyes brimmed. I made you lonely. The room went quiet. Outside, wind rustled through the dry branches. Then Aaron spoke, his voice low. There's something else I haven't told you yet. I turned to him. What now? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. Mom didn't just borrow money from relatives. She took out a personal loan against the house. When Julia's parents offered to pay for part of the wedding, Mom panicked. She didn't want them to think we couldn't afford it, so she covered the deposit herself, but the bank started calling. Dad rubbed his forehead, ashamed. She didn't tell me until last month. Mom's voice trembled. It wasn't supposed to get this bad. I thought I could handle it before anyone noticed. I stared at her, disbelief and pity warring inside me. You mortgaged the house? For Aaron's wedding? She shook her head quickly. No, not exactly. It started as a way to help with the venue deposit, but most of it went toward medical bills. I just didn't want to admit it, not to anyone. Aaron clenched his jaw. She thought if she told the truth, I'd call off the wedding. And would you have? I asked him. He didn't answer, which said enough. Mom looked at me, voice breaking. I know we've done terrible things, but please don't let this destroy us completely. We've all made mistakes. I just need my children to find each other again before I'm gone. The word gone hung heavy in the air. I sat down slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath me. All those years of anger, the sharp edges of every grudge, suddenly felt dull, like blades left out in the rain. I don't hate you, I said finally. Either of you. I just didn't know how to love you without losing myself. Mom reached for my hand. Her palm was cold, frail, but steady. You never lost yourself, Lena. You just hid her away. Tears blurred my vision. And what about you? You hid everything too. I did, she whispered, but I'm done hiding. We sat like that for a while. No shouting, no guilt-tripping, just silence that didn't hurt anymore. Then Aaron spoke again. The wedding's in 2 weeks. Julia's family offered to cover the rest, but it doesn't feel right anymore, not with everything happening. I looked at him. You don't have to cancel it. He shook his head. Maybe I do. Maybe we need to start over, all of us. Mom squeezed my hand. You could still come, she said softly. Not as a guest who owes us anything, just as family. I hesitated. I'll think about it. As I drove home that evening, the sky was streaked in pink and orange, the kind of quiet sunset you never notice until you stop long enough to look. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel furious or bitter. I just felt human, tired but open. When I parked outside my house, I noticed something on my porch, a small envelope tucked under the welcome mat. Inside was a single photo. It was me and Aaron, maybe 8 and 11 years old, sitting on Dad's old truck bed with matching grease stains on our faces. On the back, in Mom's shaky handwriting, were just 3 words: forgive each other. I stood there for a long time, holding that photo as the streetlights flickered on, one by one. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was just about choosing not to keep counting the same wounds forever. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to try. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in front of a mirror I didn't recognize, the kind that belonged in hotel dressing rooms, not mechanic garages. The reflection staring back at me looked like a stranger. Hair down for once, soft blue dress instead of oil-stained jeans. I had no idea if I was doing the right thing showing up to Aaron's wedding, but something in me said I needed to. Not for him, not for Mom, for me. The ceremony was held at a vineyard just outside town. The same one Mom once joked she'd never be able to afford, even to visit. It was beautiful, sure. Polished wooden beams, white roses lining the aisle, sunlight catching on crystal glasses. But as I stepped inside, I couldn't help but notice the quiet tension beneath the perfection. People whispered when they saw me, some with surprise, some with relief, and a few, the older relatives mostly, with judgment thinly disguised as smiles. "Oh, Lena, you came," Aunt Ruth said, clutching my arm like she'd discovered a rare sighting. "Wouldn't miss it," I lied, forcing a smile. Aaron spotted me from across the courtyard. His expression froze for a second. Disbelief, maybe, then softened into something I hadn't seen from him since we were kids. Gratitude. He excused himself from a small group of groomsmen and walked over. "You actually came," he said quietly. "I said I'd think about it," I replied, adjusting my bracelet. "Guess I did more than that." He laughed nervously. "Julia's going to be happy you're here." I raised an eyebrow. "Does she even know I am?" "Not yet," he admitted. "But I think it'll mean something. To both of us." Before I could respond, music swelled, signaling the start of the ceremony. We took our seats near the back. I could see Mom sitting in the front row, her pale hands folded over a small clutch. She turned, caught my eye, and smiled, the kind of smile that said thank you without words. Dad sat beside her, straight-backed, but with that quiet, restless guilt I'd grown up recognizing. When Julia walked down the aisle, everything shimmered. The dress, the flowers, even Aaron's expression. But for once, the shimmer didn't sting. I didn't feel envy or bitterness, just a strange calm. Like I was watching something unfold that no longer belonged to the same story I'd been trapped in. As the vows began, I looked at Mom again. Her lips trembled, eyes glassy with pride and relief. Maybe she knew she'd gone too far to fix everything perfectly, but in this moment, her children were both here, and that was enough. Halfway through the ceremony, I found myself remembering her words. Strength isn't just standing alone. It's knowing when to let people in. Maybe this was that moment, when the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride." The guests erupted in applause. I clapped too, softly, genuinely. For the first time in years, my hands didn't feel heavy doing it. Afterward, during the reception, Mom pulled me aside. "You look beautiful," she said, voice thin but steady. I smiled. "You look better." She chuckled softly. "I don't feel it." Then she hesitated, her hand tightening around mine. "Lena, thank you for coming." "I wasn't sure I could," I admitted, "but I realized something. Avoiding family isn't the same as healing from them." Her eyes filled again. "You always were the wiser one." I shook my head. "No, just the slower learner." We laughed quietly, and for a heartbeat, the years between us didn't matter. Aaron joined us a few minutes later, looking more nervous than when he'd said his vows. "Mom, can I steal her for a second?" Mom patted his arm, smiling. "Of course." He led me to the edge of the patio, where the noise from the reception faded under the rustle of the vineyard leaves. The evening sun painted everything gold. "I never said thank you," he started. "For what?" "For showing up. For not giving up on us completely. For—" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "For letting me try to make things right." I tilted my head. "You did okay." He smiled faintly. "Julia and I are planning to pay off Mom's loan once the wedding bills settle. She doesn't know yet. I figured it's time we stop taking and start fixing." That caught me off guard. The kind of responsibility I'd spent my whole life begging him to understand. "I think that's the best gift you could give her," I said. "Better than this wedding." He nodded, glancing toward the tables where our mother sat laughing with Dad, a small, tired laugh that still managed to light up her face. "Yeah," he said softly. "It is." We stood there for a moment, silent but at peace, watching the last rays of sunlight slip behind the hills. Then Erin looked at me and smirked. "You know, for someone who said she didn't miss her family, you fit back in pretty easily." I laughed. "Don't push it, little brother." He grinned. "Fair enough." As the sky deepened into dusk, lanterns flickered on, glowing against the vineyard's soft twilight. The music drifted through the air, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because everything was fixed, but because I'd stopped carrying it alone. I walked over to where Mom was sitting, resting her head gently against Dad's shoulder. She looked up at me with tired eyes and whispered, "You okay, sweetheart?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." She smiled, and that was enough. The night blurred into laughter, clinking glasses, and faint music, the kind of noise that fills silence without drowning it. When I finally stepped outside, the cool air wrapped around me like an old friend. I looked back once at the glowing vineyard, at Aaron dancing with his new wife, at Mom and Dad smiling from their table, and felt something loosen completely inside me. I didn't forgive everything, but I'd forgiven enough to breathe again. As I started my truck and the headlights cut through the dark road ahead, I whispered to myself, not as a vow, but as a truth finally learned. Sometimes saying no isn't selfish. It's how love finally learns to tell the truth. And for the first time in years, that truth felt like freedom.